Okay, good evening. Tonight is Tuesday, January 23rd, 2018. I'm calling this meeting of the McLendon-Chisholm City Council to order. Would you please rise for the pledges to the flag led by Councilmember Herron, followed by the invocation led by Councilmember Balcom. Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Ask to bow your heads, please. Father, we just thank you for who you are. And you're so loving, and you've been amazing in my family and other people's families. You've blessed us. And we live in a country of freedom. And we just thank you for your provisions, Lord. Lord, I ask that you be with those in leadership, even on local leadership here, our mayor, our governors, and definitely our president. And we just ask for wisdom, Lord, to as we govern and we do the things that we need to do in the leadership positions that we are having to do, Lord. And we just thank you for who you are. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, good evening. Meetings of the McLendon-Chisholm City Council serves and represents the citizens that reside inside the city limits of McLendon-Chisholm. In accordance with Texas state law, except when convening in executive sessions, all meetings of the City Council are open to the public. However, unless either the presiding officer decides or the council votes to suspend the rules, only the council members may engage in the proceedings. Decorum dictates that those who are present be respectful of the opinions, statements, and actions of the council and other citizens who are present, especially when they may not agree with or take exception to the words or actions of others. Adhering to rules of decorum is less about showing respect to the council, but more about demonstrating respect for oneself and to all citizens of McLendon-Chisholm. All city meetings are governed by Robert's Rules of Order, and as such, decorum, defined as controlled, calm, and well-behaved, shall be required of all those present. The mayor, or in his absence, the mayor pro tem, is the presiding officer of all meetings. The greatest benefit of using Robert's Rules of Order is that it slows down discussion and debate. This requires both sides of an issue to show consideration to the other, supporting or opposing points of view. Respecting decorum mitigates disagreements from escalating into arguments or worse. It can also help us to bring clarity to a point of view rather than rushing to judge the motives of others. Unless the presiding officer chooses to take items out of order, all matters that are before the council will be addressed in order according to the meeting agenda and Robert's Rules of Order. However, action or deliberation on any matter that is not included on the agenda cannot, by rule, be considered at this meeting or deliberated. Most agendas include an opportunity for citizens that reside inside the city limits to address their representatives on city council via citizens' comments. This opportunity is not a platform for citizens to expect or demand answers from the council. Citizens who have questions of the council will be best served to contact members or the city staff directly, especially if there is an expectation of a timely and informed response. This opportunity is also not a platform for non-citizens or contractors with the city to address the council. Individuals and groups that are not citizens of the city but wish to address a matter are welcome to contact City Hall. On occasion, the council may suspend the rules to accommodate citizen input from citizens present. In these instances, the following standards shall be respected. Discussion must stay focused on the topic at hand, and decorum is still in effect. As all business conducted at meetings is for the purpose and benefit of the city, unless otherwise indicated, when the public floor is made open, the only citizens of the city of McLendon-Chisholm who are present at the meeting may participate. At no time during the meeting may one filibuster the meeting, and while the presiding officer may call a citizen that is attempting to filibuster a meeting out of order, as the presiding officer, I shall demur to the sense of the majority of the members to make that determination should this ever occur. A citizen that wishes to engage the council shall stand at the microphone and wait to be recognized by the presiding officer before commenting. After being recognized by the presiding officer, the citizen should state their full name, spell it out for more complicated names, and their street address. From that point forward, if they rise to speak again, they may simply restate their name after being recognized. Anyone observing the proceedings electronically are ineligible to participate. Comments or questions posted online during the proceedings while the council is in session are not recognized and may not be addressed. Citizens are not allowed to make motions, including points of order or points of information. For those who believe that an action or ruling of the presiding officer is out of order, or if you believe that an issue is unclear, you may alert the city staff by passing them a note. As with any open meeting, all those present have the right to attend, but no one has the right to disrupt the proceedings. The presiding officer will make every effort to respectfully address anyone who violates decorum should they move or speak out of order. Those who disregard the admonition of the presiding officer to comply with decorum may be asked to leave the proceedings in accordance with Texas state law regarding open meetings by a governing body. Should an individual refuse to leave, the presiding officer may recess the meeting and convene after either the individual leaves or is removed by law enforcement. Now, the acoustics in the meeting chamber magnifies sound and noise. This is most noticeable when observers who are present comment to one another during session, which is both distracting to others and stifles the quality of the audio that is being recorded and or broadcast. Therefore, whenever council is in session, attendees should refrain from extraneous verbal remarks or exchanges inside the chamber, especially at the rear of the room. Attendees who wish to converse during session should move their discussion outside of the chamber. With that, I move now to item number 4 on the agenda, citizens' comments. This is an opportunity for citizens who reside inside the city limits of McLendon-Chisholm to speak to council. Citizens should stand at the podium, state their name, their name and address, and then express the concern or questions. Note that state law does not permit the council to deliberate items that are not on the agenda. Concerns may be referred to staff or scheduled for consideration at the future city council meeting. The first person to speak, if you will, press the buttons of both of those microphones. That will enable us to ensure that your comments are truly recorded in case one of those microphones goes out. The floor is now open for citizen comments.
Robert Quinn, 1401 Carrara Drive, Sonoma Verde. Good evening, and thank you for your time and attention. At the last council meeting, Wayne Orchard stated that it is always the same 14 people who come to council meetings and speak out in support of the MCVFD and salaried firefighters. He made the excellent point that this council represents 2,600 or so citizens, and we keep hearing from the council that they believe that they are firmly supported by a silent majority of citizens, and that said population desires a volunteer-only fire department. And so, believing this council to be mistaken about the public support of salaried fire service, and knowing that council members Orchard and Turnbull must soon be going forth to negotiate while empowered to discuss only a volunteer contract, last Tuesday I wrote a quick one-question survey, and while I started on my own going door-to-door Tuesday night, folks immediately started asking what they could do to help. And so on Friday night, I met with several other citizens of the city at the Sonic and Shell station there. And Friday night, these pedestrian posters started going door to door in many neighborhoods. And the fine folks at Sonic agreed to let us set up a table the next afternoon from 2:30 to 5 to take signatures as well. I'm sure you've all probably seen a copy of the survey by now online, if not in person. I tried to phrase the questions in as unbiased terminology as I can. And I have with me tonight some of the unfiltered results. Keeping in mind that I've barely had time for data validation, I have 274 responses from city residents, of which 262 indicate support for salaried firefighters and 12 indicate support for the council's current volunteer-only plan. Clearly less than 10%. The results of the survey and my own discussions with our neighbors is clear. We vastly prefer a fire department that is staffed by salaried firefighters. So again, we beseech this council to listen to the will of the people, represent the citizens and our desire for paid fire service, salaried firefighters, the same service we've come to rely on these last 4 years. Remove the stipulation that any contract under negotiation must be volunteer only, please. I hope that we can go on from here to repair our community, which has been grievously damaged by a turning away from bedrock principles. I hope that 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8 and 9 can remind us what community requires. Finally, all of you, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. I have some photocopies of several of the survey sheets. I'll go ahead and leave with the city secretary, unless I don't know if I'm allowed to bring them up there.
Absolutely, and you're giving us all 274, I assume, so
No,
please.
not at the moment. The rest, all of these will be given to whoever our negotiators are going to be on Thursday.
I'm trying to understand. So you're saying you have 274
In
signatures, but you're
my
not...
binder, yes, but I did not receive all of those until they were walked into the door here just now. So I have photocopies of the pages I already had collected myself at home.
How many are you giving us?
I honestly haven't counted how many I've photocopied. I can run home after at recess and photocopy the rest and bring those to you.
It'd be great. Thanks so much.
Okay. Go ahead and leave these with
Yes,
the
with the city
secretary for the
secretary.
moment.
Thank you so much.
Mayor Steinhagen and council, my name is Letitia Sorensen. I live at 1061 Frontier Trail, right there in McLendon-Chisholm. I've lived there for the past 32 years and raised my family there and until my husband passed away about 3.5 years ago. Well, just recently, starting before Christmas, the mail stopped delivering to our homes down the whole street because the road is so bad. Everybody gets stuck. It's a private road, but I have spent literally thousands of dollars trying to fix areas up to where I live, so that I can get to my house. But there's areas beyond me that I can't afford to fix their areas as well. And there are renters. There are lots of renters here. And the renters don't feel that they should participate in the finances of doing this road. And so we're really in a dilemma because the renters don't care, or else they don't want to fork out money. And the landlords don't seem to care because they don't live there and they're not missing their mail. So the school buses haven't come down there for the last 2 or 3 years, more than that maybe. And we have we have very many problems with delivery of any sort, UPS and FedEx and all that. But another concern I have is that if in case an ambulance or there was a fire, in which we had a fire there actually Saturday night, and the fire truck was able to get to the home, but I'm concerned that if it's raining, and when it's raining it's worse, that the ambulance or the fire truck would not be able to get to the residents, and that's a very real concern of mine because I'm getting older, and I don't know if I'm going to need the ambulance when it's raining, but it's just, as you can see, it's a concern, and I realize it's a private road. I've been to the council before this council was elected. I've been to the previous council and brought this up, and I was just told that it's just too bad. It's my problem. But I'm just pleading a cause here to see if there's anything that the city could possibly do. And so I appreciate your attention and concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sorensen.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll close citizen comments and move to item number 5, which is the Mayfield Edition plat. Discussion and action. I'm here to, I first want to start with Mr. Coker, our city planner. Mr. Coker, would you like to present from the podium or from there? It doesn't matter to us. Very good. And members of council, you have the blueprints drawing, or blue line drawings, and then we have them showing on the screens.
Members of the City Council and Mayor Michael Coker representing the city. As it relates to the Mayfield final plat, this plat has been kind of interesting because the property was purchased without complying with the requirements of our 5,000, or our SF5 5-acre requirement. And as a result of that, we worked with the Mayfields to go to the Board of Adjustment to request a variance to the size of the lot and the width of the lot, because you're supposed to have 5 acres and 300 feet of frontage. Well, this didn't have 5 acres, it's a little over 4.5, and it didn't have 300 feet of frontage, it was under 300 feet. They went to the Board of Adjustment, and the Board of Adjustment granted them the variance, subject to the fact that they have to build in accordance with the site plan that was submitted to the Board of Adjustment, which puts their house back, I think maybe 700 feet from the street. As a result of that, when they came to do their plat, we recommended to the Planning and Zoning Commission that they be obligated, and the conditions are on the back page of the staff report. Compliance with the requirements of our zoning ordinance, subject to the Board of Adjustment variances. So, compliance with subdivision regulations, which they've agreed to do. Compliance with all engineering requirements. They'll be needing to have our city engineer review their grading and drainage plans as a function of their building permit application, assuming that the City Council approves this request. They have to do a fire access road because the code requires that you be within 150 feet of a public street for your house, unless you have a fire lane that's been approved by the fire department. So we've referred this also to the fire department to get a read on the type of fire access road that they're going to need to provide access to the back of their property where the house is going to be located. And they also have to comply with all the rest of our code of ordinances requirements for platting. The City Planning and Zoning Commission has recommended approval subject to the compliance with the conditions that were attached to the information memorandum. And with that, Your Honor, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Can you just explain, obviously citizens are very well aware of the 1.5 acre minimum home site standard. Why is this different, and why does this have a 5 acre minimum?
We have a zoning district in the city that's SF5. It requires 5 acres. We don't have a whole lot of that in the city. This is one of the small areas on Connie Lane that has it on one side of the street. The other side of the street's not in the city. And as a result of that, they're obligated to comply with the regulations. But the Board of Adjustment has the authority under state law and city regulations to grant variances when there's an appropriate reason for that. Hardship, not an economic hardship, but a hardship in this case was the fact that there's no land stretcher. Mm-hmm. They couldn't make it any wider, and they couldn't make it any deeper because they had bought the land from an adjacent property owner who actually was not prepared to sell any more of their property. And the Board of Adjustment, hearing the facts that were submitted to the board by the applicant, agreed with their request to grant the variance to allow it to be less than the 5 acres, 4.5 acres, and less than the required width of 300 feet.
And related to the emergency access road, what does that have to be made of? Is that aggregate or what?
That's one of the things we've been working with the fire chief about, to make sure that the surface, whatever the surface is, can support his emergency vehicles, and that the fire code says that whatever the base is has got to be able to support 75,000 pounds. 75,000 pounds. And I've been working with the chief on a number of similar requirements where we've been able to have a compacted flex base, 6 or 8 inches, that ended up being able, by an engineer's standard, to support the weight of his equipment. And I guess the 75,000 pounds is a fire code issue. I'm not sure that our equipment weighs 75,000 pounds, but that's what the code requires. The chief has been working with us and the applicants. We've also got the one that was on an FM 1139 that I think you heard last time, where he provided an opportunity for an alternative surface. And I suspect that he will probably consider that for these folks as well.
Can you just generally, I'm not sure I understand, what kind of surface holds 75,000 pounds?
Well, asphalt and concrete. And
Okay, that's what I'm asking. So does it have to be asphalt and concrete?
No, sir.
Okay.
If an engineer can design a plan that uses flex base, which is basically crushed concrete, or gravel, or something else.
Okay, an aggregate of some
and
kind.
they can show that that will support the weight of the equipment. The chief has accepted that on multiple occasions.
Okay. Members of council? Mrs. Balcom?
Okay, so let me get this straight. So you're going down County Lane, and then, okay, I see the plot, and I pulled it up on the Google map here. So are you saying that there's going to be a different road being pulled off of Connie Lane, and that's,
It's a driveway.
okay?
I'm going to go up and show you.
Sure.
Our city limits is the middle of Connie Lane, and their house is supposed to be back about 700 feet north and west of Connie Lane. They're supposed to have a fire access road if they are more than 150 feet from the street. And the fire access road then has got to be a minimum of 20 feet wide, which then allows the fire apparatus or emergency services apparatus, it could be a EMS van or something like that, to get in and to have enough width for them to pass. In addition, it's a long haul down there, and they may have to put in a hydrant, fire hydrant, that comes in off the water line that's out in Connie Lane, back to a point further down the street. And those are requirements in our plating requirements.
Is it 1,000 feet from Connie Lane, the fire hydrant? Where's the nearest fire hydrant off Connie Lane?
Well, the nearest fire hydrant is on Connie Lane.
But where is it on Connie Lane? I'm just asking for reference.
Yeah, I'll have to get that for you. I don't have that with me tonight, but there is a hydrant on Connie Lane, and there's a water line that satisfies the requirement for water supply. And what I envision is that the fire chief is going to say that they need to put in a hydrant probably about 500 feet down their emergency access road, which is also their driveway, so that they can have access. If they build a big enough house, they have to sprinkle the house. If they don't build a big enough house that it requires sprinkling, then they have to be within 300 feet of a hydrant. And that's for our fire apparatus to hook up and then to supply water in case there's a fire.
And so you were saying earlier about the asphalt or the surface?
Asphalt or concrete.
And is the owners going to be doing that themselves?
The recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission is that the Mayfields work with the fire chief to come up with a solution to the fire apparatus access road that complies with the requirements of the fire code. And it could be concrete, it could be asphalt, or it could be an alternative that the fire chief says will work, that is proved, that they have to prove up to our city engineer. That's that 75,000 pounds of load-bearing capacity. So those are issues that the Mayfields have to deal with as a function of getting prepared to build their home.
What's the timeline for their home to be, is there a time that they're expecting to build?
I don't know the answer to that, madam. They may be here.
As soon as possible. They're ready to go.
Are they?
Okay.
And let me say that, Mr. Mayor, that the fire chief has been very responsive when it comes to dealing with these kinds of requests from our citizens.
Thank you.
I'll wait to.
Anyone else? Okay, so I will entertain a motion to approve, excuse me, to approve the Mayfield Edition final plat consisting of a single lot of 4.474 acres.
Mr. Mayor, you made the motion, so then I'm seconding?
No,
Asking for
you'll have to
second.
make the motion. Are you making the motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'll make the motion that we accept the plat that was approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission on, I believe it was on January 11th.
Subject to the conditions recommended by the commission.
Yeah, subject to the conditions recommended by the commission.
Madam Secretary, did you get that? Is there a second?
I'd second.
Mr. Woodham seconds. Okay, Mr. Herron, you have the floor for discussion if you have any.
I guess the only discussion I'd have is, have we just had Mrs. Sorensen get up here and talk about the problem that they have with their road. My only question would be, who would inspect this road to make sure that it would continue to meet the requirements? Because they may build it to meet that requirement, but knowing the conditions of the land around here with the high concentration of clay, the water tends to erode. So how do we know that in 10 years, 20 years from now, it's still going to be passable by the fire truck?
I understand the question, and the fire department has the authority to inspect all fire access roadways in the city, whether they're private or public, at any time that they have the need to or they want to. And so, for instance, the reason that the engineering is required, and we inspect all subdivisions, whether they're in the city or in RTJ, for installation of the roadway systems. And in this case, it's an emergency access route, and it's going to have to comply with whatever the chief says and whatever Dub says as far as the standards. And then
Dub is the city engineer.
Dub DeFreight. Dub DeFreight is our city engineer. And they'll have to comply with that. And the fire department has the authority and do inspections on a periodic basis of all this emergency access routes in the city. So I think that'll cover us.
Okay. I guess the only concern that I would have is based on, the condition of Frontier Road right now. So that's obviously an emergency access road for the houses on Frontier Road. And so that's not been maintained. So that was my only concern, is that, this could be built to the standard to meet the requirements, but will it be maintained? So
I understand that. I think that I hope that you'll have some discussion on your next item about this issue. Not as it relates to the Mayfields, but as it relates to Frontier and other private streets in the city. And I'm here to help with that, given the fact that Mr. Pastor can't be here.
Okay, you'll just stay there then. So if there's other discussion. Mr. Woodham, you seconded the motion. The floor is yours.
They're going to be the only ones using the road, correct?
That's correct. Them and their guests.
Right, so it's going to be a limited amount of travel. It's not going to be an open road with lots of vehicles and lots of traffic, correct?
Not unless the Mayfields are a whole lot different than everybody else in the city.
Right, and they know and have the expectation that they're going to be responsible for that road, right?
Yes, sir. This is all a private facility that's on their land, and they're going to be obligated to maintain it, to build it, to
Right,
engineer it.
and the road is specifically for emergency services, which they would be the recipient of, correct?
Sole beneficiary.
See, being not much traffic, they are the ones that are going to be responsible maintaining the upkeep. I motion to go ahead and go forward with it.
Thank you, Mr. Woodham. Other discussion, questions? Mr. Turnbull.
Mr. Coker, I don't know if you know this, the answer to this, and it may be better addressed in the next item, but does the fire department actually have any enforcement capabilities?
Yes, they do.
Do you know what they are?
If you violate the fire code, you can have penalties up to $2,000 per violation, just like any other municipal code violation. And they can do stop work orders, much like the building official can do. If you're doing something that's inconsistent with the fire code that's been adopted by the city. So they have significant.
Actually, I should have expounded on that. After the fact, to follow up on Mr. Herron's comment,
Yes,
5 years from now,
Yes, they do.
well, what can they do then?
They can file they can issue a citation for a violation of the fire code.
Okay. Thank you.
One point, and it's interesting, I think, about our fire department, because our chief is also the fire marshal, and the fire marshal has a lot of authority, and people who do not comply with the fire code can find that the fire marshal, who's also our fire chief, can make their lives miserable if he wanted to. He hasn't, but he could.
Other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it. Motion carries unanimously.
Mayor, before we go any
Yes, sir.
further, can I just make a statement to everybody and yourself also? I am on call tonight, and my phone just rang. Would you mind if I just stepped outside
Sure.
to make sure it's not work-related?
Absolutely. Why don't we take a 5-minute break so that you can do that, that you can be part of this next discussion. We'll reconvene in 5 minutes. There goes one of the microphones. All right, I'll reconvene this meeting. Time is 7:07. We're now moving into kind of moving forward onto item number 6. It's a Code of Ordinance review. Members of council, you should have received a draft of an ordinance, a new ordinance that regards street maintenance and repair and amending section 10.02.00011 of the McLendon-Chisholm Code of Ordinances concerning streets, alleys, and drainage maintenance and repair. Our city attorney's father passed away suddenly this weekend, and so he is not with us. We have conferred with him. However, on some of this material, we're not going to want to move forward in discussion without including without including him, and we may want to delay some of the discussion. But as far as the ordinance itself, I'd like to go ahead and move forward. So, Mr. Coker, are you prepared to kind of talk with us about that? Right.
The draft that Mr. Pascal has put forward for you is a pretty good starting place for managing the private roadway systems in the city. But it really only affects new applications. And I was talking to the mayor about this. For instance, if this were in place, in addition to the fire code, the Mayfields would be held accountable with this ordinance. So from a point in time, if the council were to adopt this going forward, there would be a vehicle for us to assess homeowners associations or private property owners for maintenance of their private roadway systems. And I think that that is kind of the objective that the council is interested in, based on the historic reluctance of our council and for us as a city to be the owners of private roadway systems, because they're expensive. They require a lot of maintenance. When they're designed, when a local street is designed, it's designed with a 30-year lifespan. But if you talk about a roadway system like Frontier, which was designed way before any regulations were, and probably didn't have this, it probably didn't comply with our current standards, this will not help us with that, because this ordinance only applies to subdivisions or plats, like we talked about with Mayfields, from today forward, or from the date the council adopts an ordinance. And one of the things Attorney Pascal and I have discussed, and I discussed with the mayor, is I think we need to consider how we address our existing roadway systems that are substandard, that are problematic. Frontier is, I was telling the mayor that, I'm glad I've got a high lift vehicle, because it's tough, and I'm surprised that the fire department is able to get in there and do their work if they have to. So with that, the recommendation that I have for your consideration tonight, after discussions with Mr. Pascal, is that you get some feedback on this proposed draft, and that at a subsequent meeting we talk about how we address the existing roadway systems that are problematic, and how that can be addressed. I'm not sure what the answer is. That's why we're looking for the council to give us some guidance. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm glad to answer any questions that I might have, but I think that this ordinance is pretty straightforward. It accomplishes what I think the council asked Mr. Pascal to do as far as going forward from a point in time. But I don't think it addresses any of the roadway systems that are existing out there today.
Members? Mrs. Balkin?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've actually been in through email exchange with Leticia, and about her street situation, and I have talked to the USPC, United States Postal Service. They are not going to deliver until some changes need to be made, which is that the maintenance of the road is causing the unmaintenance of the road is causing problems with their vehicles, and they have had their vehicles get stuck on the road and all that. So yes, there needs to be something that needs to be done. And I have had conversations with Pascal about it, and he gave me some discussion points to talk about. We can all kind of like talk about this in the future, and I'm hoping that you will also join us in that. And we're going to try to get the 16 residents on that street to come and invite them to come to talk about it as well. But as far as this, like, how come? So if it's just going to be for new items, we're going to have to make a completely different ordinance just for the current private roads. Is that what you're saying?
No, they're grandfathered. They're under grandfather clauses.
Well,
The
they're
problem.
grandfathered, but if the city wants to step into the breach to resolve transportation deficiencies on existing private streets, that's the discussion I think we have to have.
Yeah, it's not an ordinance discussion, it's a,
It's a policy discussion that you
Yeah.
all need to decide on. But if there were a solution, it wouldn't have to necessarily be a separate ordinance. It could be part of an ordinance like this one. It wouldn't have to be separate, although a separate ordinance might work. I don't have the answer for you. If I did, I'd tell you. I don't know the answer. This is a hard one.
I was just making sure that it's a possibility that this could be included, I guess, in the future when we have that discussion, so. And as far as like the newer roads for, this is not including like a dirt road, this is just mainly like how Sonoma Verde is, like these types of developments.
Yeah, it's really talking about, we're meeting with a developer on some property tomorrow, about 200 acres with 91 houses or something like that, and they're going to have private roads, and they're going to be owned and operated by the homeowners association. This kind of ordinance would apply to that.
And we talked about enforcement, so what would be the effect if they didn't,
Well, if they don't, under this proposal, under this draft, if the homeowners association fails to maintain the roadway system, we direct them to maintain it. If they say we're not going to maintain it, then we can go in and maintain it and assess the property owners in the HOA.
okay. Is it more than just fines?
It's not a fine.
It's an assessment. We
It's an
basically,
assessment to cover
bill
the
'em.
cost of the maintenance that the city performed on the HOA's behalf.
Oh, so we would go in there?
Yes, it would be us. That's why I think the discussion is worth your time.
Okay. Anybody else?
Mr. Turnbull.
This ordinance going forward, I understand, is there nothing that we can put in place to force people to bring their property up to code?
We've been going round and round, and we're trying to come up with solutions like that. But again, the grandfather clause in Texas supersedes
But
new
we
ordinances.
We haven't grandfathered them yet.
No, they are grandfathered by the sheer fact that they are in existence today. So,
But they're in violation of code now, aren't they?
how?
I know, that
There
was
is
a
no code.
question. There is no code whatsoever other than the fire code.
Fire code is it.
I think that may be correct. I'm not sure when Frontier was developed, but I don't think it was, I think it was before the city was a city. And,
1982?
okay, so it was after the city was a city.
Well, if it starts affecting emergency vehicles,
I think
that,
you're,
I'm going down that direction. Do you
yes,
hear where I'm going?
I think that's the direction that we probably need to go, is to see how we can utilize the laws that are not preempted by the fact that they've been there a long time.
Correct.
But that are on the books today and they apply to everybody all the time. And the fire code is one of those, it's important.
And so far, we already have, like I said, United States Postal Service, they're not going down, so that's one agency, so.
Well, I'm going to tell you now, this is not quite true, but it's similar to being true. I was out there driving on Frontier one time, and I went by a ditch, and there was a Volkswagen in it. Not really. But that's how, it was lumpy out there, very lumpy. I was glad I had a four-wheel drive,
Wow.
anyway.
This is,
Also,
go ahead, please.
Yeah, also, I understand that something the size of Sonoma Verde is not going to be putting in anything other than concrete or asphalt streets, but is there any way for us to include in developers' agreements any clauses that enforce this, that put it in place not only through an ordinance, but also through the developers' agreement?
Yes, we can use developer agreements to amplify existing regulations. This proposal is an adjustment to our existing subdivision regulations, and our existing subdivision regulations actually require concrete, so, and as does the county, for the public, what would normally be the public streets, which are the local streets, not necessarily for driveways, but for the public way.
So you're saying this development that you're meeting about tomorrow would meet that requirement?
Oh, yeah.
For,
Now, I'm saying yes, haven't talked to them yet, but I'm meeting with them tomorrow, and I suspect when we're done, they will understand.
that they have to put concrete?
That's right.
Okay. That's
And
all-
and
that's all.
interestingly, we're also talking to them about
I
other
didn't hear
issues.
what you said.
Interestingly, we're also discussing some other issues that we're trying to expedite, situation that will have an impact on you guys as well, so.
Right.
Right. What else?
Other
We,
questions?
we're gonna have to, I mean, we can't have a full and robust discussion about this because obviously we're talking about moving down the road of the violation of the emergency vehicle code. That's a legal issue and that's a sticky wicket. So we've got to be very careful about how we move forward with that if we do, because that is going to impact every homeowner there, including those who have contributed to their own maintenance of the streets. So this is why we're expediting, but we're walking prudently, if that makes sense, Tish. Yeah. Any other discussion? All right. Can you turn off those mics? That way we say battery,
How do you turn them off?
it's off. And now the other one. There you go. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Coker. You are free to go. All right. The next item on the agenda is item number 7, city secretary position. As most of you know, Dave Butler is, we are working on a transition plan for our city administrator who is retiring at some point this year. We haven't laid out actual dates. Mr. Butler, by the way, is getting married in May, so we're excited for him with that. And in the process, one of the things when we hired Lisa was is this a person who could move into and transition into city administrator? And then Mayor Hodges and myself, we interviewed her, and we were pretty blown away by her experience and her expertise and her knowledge. And since being city secretary, she has. It's funny, she's more of a go-to person for me now. She's really moving into that quite well. Dave, Mr. Butler has been working, for that transition. It's been a really good process, and I think it is time for us to kind of move in a direction so that she is named assistant city administrator. And the reason why is not that I'm trying to tie the hands of a future council should the election go a different way, but it gives the city secretary / city assistant city manager a little more ability to work with other cities. They would take her a little more seriously in that process, and it also reflects the intent of moving her in that direction. So. Is there questions? Well, actually, I'd first like to entertain a motion approving this is her title to Assistant City Secretary slash Assistant City Administrator slash City Secretary. And this is not include a pay raise, just so everyone's aware. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Turnbull, motion, is there a second?
I second.
Mrs. Balcom has seconded. Mr. Turnbull, you have the floor to speak to your motion.
I don't really have a whole lot of discussion. My dealings with Lisa, she's bailed me out of several spots. I think she's shown excellent skills and forethought. She usually comes up with things that we don't even think about that we need to do. So moving her into that position, if she's willing to step into the lion's den, I think is a good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Ms. Balcom, you seconded?
I concur.
Any other discussion? Mr. Herron?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. I'd just say that, you know, it just makes common sense to have them doing both duties because, I mean, just recently Mr. Butler had an accident and, you know, that heaven forbid accidents like that happen, but they happen every day. We don't need to be one deep in any position, I would put forward. And I do believe that even as Lisa, if she ends up taking the city administrator position, the next city secretary we hire should be the assistant city administrator as well. I think this is a prudent thing to do.
Well, and just so you're aware, Lisa and I have talked about it, and actually she is capable of doing both if she becomes city administrator and then hiring an assistant. So it would save our city money, and it would also, because of the amount of work we've been assessing, and it may be something that she could do both. So we're talking right now. We have made no decisions, but that's kind of the direction that we're headed, just so you're aware. But what you're saying also makes perfect sense if we do go ahead and move with an official city secretary. That's a really good point.
Mr. Mayor, could I offer?
Hold on one second. Mr. Herron?
No, I was just going to say that that other thing that does, it allows you to grow your secretary into that position as it goes along. The problem with is that, you know, like as you said, is that we have to go out and find somebody who can replace Mr. Butler, which is going to be a difficult thing. But if our secretary can sit there day in and day out and work with him, you've got a built-in replacement. That I think is a very prudent thing to do for the city. And I'd be concerned if if we're asking Lisa to do both duties. I mean, it's hard enough doing one job, let alone trying to do two jobs. And the problem is that we have to take vacation and we also get sick and things like that. And then what do you do if she's filling both positions and she can't be there? That means that you don't have a city secretary or a city administrator. So I do think that we need both.
Okay. Thank you for your input, Mr. Butler.
I think that it's very important that you're considering this, looking forward for the future of the city. And of course, I'm prejudiced in Lisa's case because I do day-to-day see her skills. And I also see her stumbling blocks and where she needs to be bolstered and guided and directed. And I try to do that on a daily basis in order to bring her along, mostly helping her with the historical knowledge that I've gained over the years and explaining what is and where this goes and that kind of thing. And we have enough time before I'm out the door to be able to get this done, and so that you get her to a place where she hits the road running. And you're right about the title, if you will, in dealing with other jurisdictions. Somehow it's not right, but city secretaries don't get the same respect as city administrators do when they're walking through the door, and if she needs to go through the door, getting their attention, having that title will work very well for her. So I've seen that happen. I'm comfortable with the fact that we're going this way so that when I do walk out the door and get on my bike and ride, I'm relaxed about what's going on. So.
One of the things that, just to be aware, Council, our city administrator is also our code enforcement. He holds that position. That's really where I would like for us to start looking at alternatives, who we could fit into that role. And it doesn't have to be a full-time person or anything like that. If the city secretary, if Lisa is doing both those jobs, or the bulk of that, really her time is not going to be well spent trying to enforce our ordinances. Now, the mayor is typically does that if there is no code enforcement, but I think it would be better, our city would be better served if we found somebody, a retiree or something like that, who might be willing to step into that. But that's process, and I just want to help inform everybody exactly how we're kind of moving as far as transition goes.
I've asked Mr. Ellis to consider that as well, so.
Oh, really? Oh, good.
And he would have to go get his shingle again and get the training and all and do that, but he's giving it some good thought, but he might be a natural fit too, because he's out there and
great.
about on a daily basis, so he could see the code issues.
That is a great idea. Wow.
Don't we have a contract with him, though?
Yeah. That
That
can be
doesn't
amended.
involve code enforcement per se, so you would have to change that. But
Yep. We just amend it. Any other discussion? Okay, hearing none, all in favor of the title change from city secretary to assistant city administrator / city secretary, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, motion carries unanimously. Okay, we're now moving on to item number 8, and I'm going to hand the floor over to Councilmember Herron for a presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I created this presentation basically kind of in response, over the last few city council meetings, we've had a lot of people get up and voice, concerns, and so I wanted to create this presentation to kind of show where the city council is actually looking at, and to give some understanding of what are the options that we have and have been looking at. There's a lot of people aren't aware of. So one of the first things that I did was I went back and I took a look at every one of the citizens' comments between October 10th and January 9th. There were 32 citizens' comments. During that time, it showed that there were 8 distinct categories or concerns that were being raised by the citizens of McLendon-Chisholm. And you can see them up there on the screen there. Of the eight, the single largest concern was about the city council having a signed contract with for fire services with the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department. All of the other concerns literally were half or less of that one concern. So that was the highest concern that everybody had, was us having this contract. Below that, if you went through, you took a look at it, you can see those for yourself. The concerns were actually much, much smaller. And then the concerns of having like a paid service was only equal to the exact same as having a reliable EMS service or the city council working with McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department. So I was going based on the people who got up there and actually voiced their opinion. So as I said, I took 32 different people's opinions and I created this graphic from there. So we're looking and listening to what the people have to say, but as you can see, it's kind of a shotgun there. There's no real clear pattern as to what concerns everybody. Everybody seems to have a different concern. And those are only the people that have show up to the city council meeting and have spoken. So what I did was I wanted to ask a couple questions. The first one, what's our requirements? What are McLendon-Chisholm's requirements for emergency services? Last week, Mr. Mayor, we had the chief of the sheriff of Rockwell County was here, and you asked him a question about are we too small to have our own sheriff deputy full-time? And his response was that, yep, we're too small, we don't need a sheriff's deputy at this time. Maybe as we grow, we might need one, but at this time, we don't need one. So I took that and I was wondering, okay, based on that, there's a sheriff's professional opinion that we don't, in fact, need our own deputy full-time. Do we need full-time and paid, full-time, or not full-time, but do we need paid and manned fire services? And so I said, well, how can we determine whether or not we do or not? And I said, well, I think the best way to answer this question will be to look at and compare the latest sheriff and emergency service call volumes to see if there are any indicators or trends going on. So what I did is I took, and those are in our packets tonight, I took the December response calls And what I looked at was how many calls there actually were. And so McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department provides us both the calls inside the city and in the fire district. But we're only concerned about the ones inside the city because currently the county is being contracted directly from Rockwell County. So what they said, they reported that they had 11 EMS calls, or they had 13 calls. 11 of them were EMS calls, 1 carbon monoxide detection, and 1 was a gas leak. So what I did is I took that and I compared their calls against the Rockwell Sheriff's dispatch report, and I could only correlate 5 of their responses to what the Rockwell dispatch, or Rockwell Sheriff's Department dispatch says that they dispatched them out to. So I'm not sure where these other calls come from, but they weren't dispatched by Rockwell County to go, any of those ones you see with a check mark there, they don't correlate to what the Rockwell County dispatch says. So next slide here, this. Yes.
Okay, so where did you get where it says, is that a question mark? Where did you say that you get these numbers from?
Where did I get these from? These are in our packet tonight. If you go down, you look at you'll have both the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department response reports and also the sheriff's.
Toward the end of the meeting where we have the reports, where it says.
Oh, so our monthly report?
Yes, our monthly
okay.
report.
So I got these by reviewing our information that's in our packets early. So I use that information. You'll see those. We have those, and you can directly correlate those. So, but what we're seeing is basically there were 11 calls within the city of McLendon-Chisholm, or 77% of those calls of the 13 were all for emergency services. Interesting, like I said, interesting note that I could only correlate 5 of those calls. This kind of begs the question: where did the other calls originate from, and how did the other 8 calls, and how did if they weren't dispatched by the sheriff's department, who dispatched them to respond to those calls? So it kind of begs the question, because they're not on the next one. You'll see on the next sheet. So, and in fact, there were no fires. This is the big thing. In December, there were no fires, but yet there were 4 fires in the Fire District 22. Any questions? If you have questions, just interrupt me and we'll go. Okay, this is the Rockwell Sheriff's Dispatch Report, and you see there, I tried to correlate the calls that the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department provided against those with the Rockwell Sheriff's Department Dispatch Report. So I could only correlate 5 of the calls. One of the calls that they list here was for a fire, which was on, it was on the, I got it in red there. It's on the 28th. It's listed on the sheriff's report as a fire in McLendon-Chisholm, but the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department didn't respond to it. So I found that very interesting that there was a fire that they didn't respond to in the city of McLendon-Chisholm. The big thing here is that
Wait a minute, just for clarification, you mean that it's not on the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department's
Yeah, that's not on the report.
Gotcha, okay. Is it possible they could have just missed it?
I guess it could be. There's another anomaly. If you look at this report, I copied this exactly like they are on the report that we got from McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department. If you look up there, number 1 up there, it says 1206. It's actually out of order. So the actual rest of them start, and they're in a chronological order. It's like this one was put on there as an afterthought. I'm not sure how it got on there, but it's out of chronological order. So I'm sure that it could have been one that they missed, but there's definitely, there was a fire listed that the fire department didn't respond to, or they didn't list that they responded to it, but it's on the sheriff's department dispatch. So there were a total of 26 calls that the sheriff's department dispatch reported, and basically that's 26 is twice as many as the calls that McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department responded to in December. So if the sheriff's deputies went to all of these, they're basically responded to twice as many calls as the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department.
Hold on, so you're saying that the sheriff responded to these?
I don't know that they did or not. I'm saying if they did, but even if they didn't, they responded, if they didn't respond to those 5 that the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department, so then they would have responded at least 19 versus 13 in the city. So there's more. And so So basically, what we're saying is that our sheriff's deputies are responding to more calls within our city than is the.
So the sheriff's, okay, I see, the sheriff's department actually did respond to these?
Yes.
Yes, on this report that we're looking at, okay. Good, okay.
And
I'm with
again,
you.
Only 5 of the calls on the sheriff's dispatch report could be correlated to those that were provided to us from the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department. Okay, this is an actual breakdown of the emergency calls. It's that were provided to us by Chief Jones. I put a link up there, so I asked Mrs. Balcom if she could put this on our website so that people could get access to it, so that if they're interested in this, they don't have to go and put a, not freedom of information, public records request. So this will actually be on our page. You can actually click on that, and you can listen to this information directly from the chief in his own words. So anyway, basically, we can clearly see that a large percentage of McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department calls are EMS related. About 53% of all the calls are to do with EMS. The rest of the calls, like for the fire department, 29% break down to related to fires. 9% actual fires, 9% false alarms, and 11% what they call good intent. They got called out or were headed to something, and then they got waved off or told to go back. So that basically makes up 29% of their calls actually having something to do with fire-related anyway.
Well, this is not broken down by the city versus the county. This is the entire fire
Yeah, this was the
district.
entire, this was last year.
Correct,
This is from last year, which included both the city and the unincorporated, the ETJ and unincorporated areas, the last information that we had.
So basically, I just need to put the date, what's the date timeline for this?
Did he provided this?
Yeah.
That would have been October, through October 2017.
So
Yeah.
it would be January.
January through October.
Yeah, through October
2017.
One of the things to note here is that the second largest category, yes, sir?
I'm sorry. He was, well, it's either that or he was reporting a year as of October. So I'm not sure which one it was. So the video would show it. Sorry.
That's why I included the link to the video, so if there are any questions, we can actually go back and watch the actual video itself. As you note on here, the second largest category of calls is things like putting, which is what they call general services, which is like putting a fire truck behind somebody changing a flat tire or going out to unlock somebody's locked car door. Things which don't necessarily equate to emergency calls, but that's their second largest percentage of their calls were things like that. Okay, so I wanted to cover a little bit. This is one of the questions we hear a lot of people talk about, is that the city council budgeted money and that somehow this money belongs to the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department. The reality was that the city council approved a budget in FY 18, fiscal year 2018 for the city budget, which included $333,457 for public safety. Under the public safety line, there is a line for $329,550 that's labeled Fire Department Protection. But I believe that this line is mislabeled and should actually read Emergency Services to provide to the city of McLendon-Chisholm. And it's to provide the following services to McLendon-Chisholm: emergency medical services, which is approximately 53% of all emergency calls within the city of McLendon-Chisholm; fire protection services, which is currently 29% of all emergency calls within the city of McLendon-Chisholm, and it's further broken down to be 9% fires, 9% false alarms, and 11% good intent. Other services like the 18% for emergency calls, it's further, there's an 18% that's further broken down into things like general services, things that I contest that we don't need those things, and weather issues, and then also hazardous conditions. And then the last thing that's something that we heard a little bit tonight about is there's a fire inspection and arson investigation requirement that we don't hardly ever talk about, but that's definitely something that we do need the fire department doing, and it should be part of the contracts that we contract with them.
Again, this is not city. This is the calls are still the fire district, not just the city.
Yeah, no, I'm just using the data that I had at hand.
Yeah.
So if we went back and extracted all of the data from I think that the results would change dramatically if we didn't use the ETJ and unincorporated areas, because over the last several years, there's been more calls
In fact, they have that chart in here, and I'll show you how many more calls there were in the ETJ than there were in the unincorporated area than there were in the city. So if you take out those numbers, our numbers are, it changes dramatically. Okay, so we received from the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department a proposal. In their proposal, it stated for 2 paid firefighters on duty 12 hours a day for 365 days a year from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. daily. It has been stated that the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department has trouble getting volunteers between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. because people leave the city to go to work. What this also means, which nobody ever addresses this, is that this also means that when they're manning the fire station from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. is when most people aren't in the town, or they're not at home. They're gone to work. So we're manning when the least population is in our city. So that's kind of a, it's an oxymoron to say, well, we need to do this because we can't get people, but we're manning it when there's not any of the people around. So do we really need the manning? So, I mean, we need to take a hard look at that. All volunteer firefighters provide 12 hours a day of, so we've got, under this contract, it would be 12 hours a day of paid service, but we all have an all-volunteer firefighters for another 12 hours of the day, from 7 p.m. till 7 a.m. every morning. So there's been a lot of comments made that, well, we can't revert back to a volunteer status, when the reality is half of every day we have an all-volunteer fire department as it is. So I don't think there's much of reverting back if that's 50% of every day we have a volunteer fire department. And one of the things they said part of this contract proposal was that they would strive to provide response times in 9.5 minutes, but provided no guarantee or consequences if they failed to meet the 9.5-minute response time. And some of the information that we later received from the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department was that they had used the McLendon-Chisholm funded firefighters, the 2 people that we pay for every day, were being used to provide the same level of service to support the ETJ and unincorporated areas of Fire District 22 from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So this will make more sense when I go forward and you see what we were paying and what the coverage area is. That this kind of concerns me that we were paying a large sum of money and they were utilizing those people to actually provide services to somebody else. So we were paying for them, but they're being used to give somebody else better service. The fire department personnel can only provide basic life support, BCLS, basic life support services or care, even if the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department firefighter is trained as a paramedic or EMT. So this is something that the chief said in December 14th? We were at the Baptist church. He made the stand that basically, even if his guys are paramedics or EMTs on the truck, when they show up, they can't act in that. And then that was further restated when we talked to Rockwell EMS that even if they are a paramedic or EMT, they can't provide anything more than basic life support services. So if we're paying for what they've termed was premium service, which I definitely don't believe is premium service, we're only getting basic life support services from the firemen when they show up for EMS calls. Okay, this is the breakdown of Rockwall County and the fire districts. On the left-hand side, you see the complete Rockwall County Fire District map. Each fire district that is outside of the city, such as Rockwall, Heath, Fate, or Royce City, you see that there's different shades up there. And so each of those fire districts that are outside of the city are funded by the Rockwall County. So Rockwall does a 2-cent sales tax, and it comes from all the unincorporated areas of Rockwall County. So not any 2-cent sales tax from any of the cities, just the unincorporated areas. So you can imagine there's not too many businesses in the unincorporated area. But out of that 2-cent sales tax, they come up with a pot of money, and they divvy that up, and they provide that, distribute it between all of the different fire agencies who provide fire services in these different fire districts. Fire District 22 is the one that the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department supports. And so typically, on a typical year, this year, because they didn't start on time, they would typically get $67,500 from Rockwall County for the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department to provide services in Fire District 22, which is the lime green area. So if you look at the right-hand map up there at the top, you'll see that green area, and you see inside of that green area in the blue, outlined in blue, that's actual McLendon-Chisholm's city. That's our, basically the city limits of McLendon-Chisholm. Thank you, sir. One of the things to note here is that we paid, or last year, we paid $320,000 for 2 men to provide us 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. fire services. The county provided the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department $67,500 from this 2-cent sales tax to provide fire services to the rest of Fire District 22, just so you understand. So some of the key notes to note here is that basically the size of Fire District 22, McLendon-Chisholm, the city of McLendon-Chisholm, only makes up 1/3 of the fire district. This is coming from the fire department themselves. The rest of the fire district is made up of the ETJs and unincorporated areas of Rockwall County. The population that are inside the city is equal to the population and the number of houses that are outside the city. So they're approximately equal. So outside of the city, that Fire District 22 is 2/3, where our city is 1/3. But the number of houses and the number of populations are approximately equal. Yeah, like as I said, the annual Rockwall provided $67,000 to the fire services for 22, but yet we were being asked to provide $300 and something thousand to provide services to an area that was 1/3 smaller. So it didn't make much sense.
Well, and I just want to say, the numbers on population are approximate. When we asked the fire chief what the population of the unincorporated area was, including the ETJ, he said he estimated 3,500. We're estimating, based upon the city planner, he's saying 2,160 something. We're basically saying less than 2,500. So I'm not sure about the number of houses. Mr. Turnbull, did we ever? Yeah, we never were able to. And it's interesting because the county commissioners, they're also, they were also not able to count houses in unincorporated areas as well, because how they divvied all that money up between the cities is based upon how many rooftops and things, and so it's pretty much a guesstimate.
Who has this on their machine? Is it you or is it Elisa?
Lisa.
Lisa, can you click on that blue area, that blue line there? One of the things real quickly, and there's a way to click back to it very quickly. This will take you to the, I wasn't supposed to do that.
Is this taking you to a link?
It was going to take you to another slide, but if you can just bring it back up. Basically, I was going to show what the actual, my background. No, it's not the next one.
That was, oh yeah.
Yeah, if it doesn't work, it's okay. What I did is I put a link in there that took to another slide that I have in the backups, which actually shows the historic responses that both inside the city and outside the city that would address the question of, okay, how many times do they actually respond in the city versus outside the city? And it was a much larger amount of times that they respond outside the city on all the previous years. So in the last line, like I said, the big thing that this was a problem that I noticed was the fact that we were paying $320,000 and the county was only paying $67,000, and yet everybody was getting the same level of service, which didn't seem quite right. So going back to this slide here to talk about the breakdown of requirements, once again, here's the McLendon-Chisholm's emergency services requirements. We can clearly see that the emergency medical services are the largest requirement and where we should probably be focusing our efforts and funding. I mean, 53% of all of our calls are based on EMS, and that's probably where we need to spend our money. Previously, we had addressed the requirements to McLendon, to the MCVFD, and asked why they don't have their own vehicle that's purpose-built to provide for these type of things. So we'd asked that question directly to the fire chief. Why don't you have a purpose-built vehicle if 53% of all your calls are EMS related? Because they had come in and they were complaining that they were wearing out their fire truck responding to these type calls. Well, if they identified a problem, but yet they hadn't solved their own problem. and they realized that they were responding to many, many more EMS calls than they were to fire calls, so this only made sense. So to date, the McLendon-Chisholm has been unwilling to change the way that they operate to better meet the needs of the city of McLendon-Chisholm, which is emergency medical services about 53% of the time. So what are our options? What options are open to the city of McLendon-Chisholm to basically solve the problem, to meet our requirements? Because now we know that we have both an emergency medical services problem and we have a requirement for fire services. And we see that the emergency medical services are definitely a much higher, yes, sir?
One of the, well, and it's important to note that when the council, according to the minutes, when the council was considering paying firefighters, it was because at that time it really was focused on Rockwall EMS services.
I've got that in mind.
What's that? Is it you going with that? All right, then all right, go ahead, please.
No. So on October 1st, 2017, Rockwall EMS started a new contract with the County of Rockwall that contains a new response time of 7 minutes, 59 seconds to any location within Rockwall County. Our mayor sits on that Rockwall County EMS board and has stated that if and when Rockwall EMS does not meet their 7 minute 59 response time, they will have to pay a penalty, and they have. So I want to leave that open to you if you want to address that.
Yeah, so at the contract started October 1st. I was part of that negotiation, and the biggest problem was that there was no way to enforce what was then a 14-minute response time guarantee. So they would miss that response time 20 minutes or so, and so the city council, in response to the concern that they were having to ensure that our citizens had a quick response time, that they would have emergency personnel there. This was the impetus, so that there would be emergency service personnel on scene for medical emergencies, and beginning October 1st, all that changed, which is why it was such a game changer for the city, because not only is an overwhelming number of calls medical emergencies, but we now have a guaranteed response time of 7 minutes, 59 seconds from the Rockwall County Medical Services, EMS, which is something that they are held accountable to. So at the last Emergency Services Corporation meeting, the first month they missed 2 calls, and the Rockwall County EMS was fined somewhere around $24,000 for those 2 calls where they did not meet that standard. Well, since that time, they haven't missed any, because they were incentivized by the fact that they don't want to lose that money. So that accountability was very important to us on the Emergency Services Corporation Board, and it has demonstrated that it really works.
Well, that's good, and what that means for the citizens is that they're getting guaranteed service on the time frames that they're expecting to get it, which are within the 8 minutes, what they call the quality of life, or basically to save someone's life within 8 minutes. So some of the key factors that we're seeing by this Rockwall EMS service is that each ambulance is staffed with 2 paramedics that are capable of providing advanced cardiac life support care. As I said before, if we contract again with McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department, when they show up, they can only provide BCLS, basic life support. They cannot provide any of this higher capability.
And a minute and a half after.
Yeah, at a minute and a half after, yeah. So Rockwall also has the Medic 80 vehicle, which is manned by a senior
I
paramedic.
think we need to explain like the difference, like understanding of what a paramedic is, because I think there's a misunderstanding why the differences between the 2 types of paramedics. And
Sure.
I think it was addressed by Mr. Ownby. You want to talk about that?
So I can address that. I mean, basically, they can both be paramedics and qualified and trained as paramedics. The problem is that working for McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department, they don't have the authorities to actually do things like provide IVs or to administer cardiac drugs. epinephrine and some of the other drugs to restart somebody's heart. So they can't do that. So the only thing that they're allowed to do would be basically to put a bandage on to stop somebody from bleeding. They could use an AED to defibrillate somebody if they had an issue, or they could provide, chest compressions. Those are basic things that any individual on the street can do themselves. So they're not anything complicated. So even if they have a paramedic, he can't act in that capacity. So the paramedics have the ability to deliver advanced life-saving skills, provide medications, and do the things that are necessary to keep somebody alive or to revive somebody should they go into cardiac arrest. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and was that also said, I could have sworn something about a doctor, they would be able to have access to contacting some sort of a practitioner, is that correct?
Yes, they're actually overseen by a practitioner who basically, and they can have direct communications with them and get information right away. So instead of them out there operating on their own without any supervision, these guys, paramedics under the EMS, they're actually being supervised and have direct communications with a fully qualified emergency room doctor.
Have you talked about the Medic 80?
No, that's my next point. So the other thing that they have is what's called the Medic 80, which conducts the same capability as basically as the ambulance in the triage and paperwork part of it. So what they've got is basically having an additional vehicle that can roam around and provide services when ambulances aren't in the area. So what this is, they have a senior paramedic in this vehicle who can act autonomously, and he can arrive much quicker and start providing some of the services that are necessary. Some of the neat things about this, though, is that when they show up, they're actually starting the triage and doing the paperwork that the ambulance has to normally do. And so when the ambulance actually shows up, it actually speeds up the time that they can put the patient in the ambulance and start heading to the hospital. In the case of McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department, if they're on scene first, the ambulance still has to come there, perform the triage and all the paperwork, which they estimate is around 7 to 10 minutes. Then they can put the patient on the gurney, put him in the ambulance, and take him off to the hospital. So the Medic 80 actually speeds up the service part of it to get the patient to the hospital and to get the actual care in the emergency room.
I think so on the Emergency Services Corporation Board, we were, this was kind of a back and forth bone of contention. We were kind of going back and forth about the Medic 80, but we were, once we understood that this Medic 80 is staffed with a senior paramedic. This is somebody who has 10, 12, 20 years of experience. And the long and short of it is this one paramedic can do the job of what would typically take two, younger junior paramedics. So the Medic 80 is actually, if I'm in an urgent care situation, I would actually prefer to see the Medic 80 arrive first. Not that the ambulance can't, but just because of that experience and that they can assess so much quicker and get things moving. The Medic 80 can administer drugs. They've got everything the ambulance has except the gurney.
Just a point of information. The rookie on the Medic 80s for Rockwall EMS has 23 years experience.
Yeah, that's right.
So taking this into consideration, we started looking at 53% of all of our calls are EMS related. So is there something we can do to help improve the quality of EMS inside of the city of McLendon-Chisholm? So we actually contacted the Rockwall EMS. See if I can get this thing to change. There it goes. And we actually are in discussions with Rockwall EMS about the potential to place a Medic 80 vehicle and a senior paramedic in McLendon-Chisholm 24 hours a day, 365 days a year to provide faster response times in the city, provide us with advanced cardiac life support care, and speed up ambulance arrivals to the hospital, and provide improved response time to our unincorporated areas. So, we're looking at that right now in discussions, and so we've got a sizable amount of money in our emergency services line that, a lot of people have said that, well, we've got to give that to McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department. But I say that if we've got that kind of money, we need to look at what we're really going to use that money for, and let's see if we can't get better service for our constituents in the city.
So let's take a look real quick. We're gonna compare. I guess you had a question?
Yeah, okay, so if they would be, so they would just leave the car running out in the parking lot? I mean, what's going on
No,
here?
it's plugged in.
Okay, no, it's actually plugged in. So if you see in this picture up there, right there at by that rear tire, you see a cable running up to it. They actually have air conditioning or a climate control system inside the vehicle, and the vehicle is actually plugged into a 110 or 220 volt connection. And it's actually kept climate controlled because they've got medications inside the vehicle. So anybody knows what the temperature in a car gets around here in the summertime, that would damage the medicine. So they have to keep it climate controlled. So they have it plugged in. So the vehicle's not running, but it actually is climate controlled. They have all of their equipment in the back of the vehicle, and then their the personnel, if they're not in the vehicle, would be inside of a building, such as their corporate headquarters off of Highway 549 or somewhere here in the city of McLendon-Chisholm that we're negotiating on right now.
And they've got a backboard, I forgot. They've got a
They got
backboard in
backboard,
there, too.
they've got medications, basically they have enough capability that they can start providing care on scene with just the one paramedic.
So did they talk about, I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here, but did they talk about, like, because, you know, it's about 12 and a half miles, 12.6 miles in McLendon-Chisholm. Okay, so would it be about half the time, you would say, if they were here?
No, this vehicle, if we negotiate for this Medic 80 vehicle will be in the city of McLendon-Chisholm 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, unless it's been called out to go to a call, which could be in the city or potentially, because this will be the farthest to the south of Rockwell County. They would actually be responding also into the ETJ and unincorporated areas.
And mutual aid.
And mutual aid, yes. Will it reduce the response time? Oh, yes, most definitely. So currently, the closest ambulance we have is next to Kane Elementary School over on 549. So that's going to probably reduce their response time from 7 minutes 59 to maybe as close as 4 to 6 minutes.
And so this is 24-hour service?
24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We're having one fully qualified paramedic who can do ACLS, providing services to the city of McLendon-Chisholm. So let's take a look and let's compare the two different emergency services capabilities. So when we compare our current McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department service with the combined McLendon-Chisholm EMS and McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department service, we see that the choice between a 12 by 365 fire service with enhanced manning, because that's realistically what it is. We're getting enhancement of manning that we're paying to be in there, but it's really not premium service. It's just an enhancement of them manning that station for 12 hours a day. And then 12 hours, 365 days a year for volunteer service. That's what we have today, every night from 7 p.m. In fact, right now it's after 7 p.m. It's an all-volunteer fire department. And they're a jack of all trades, but really a master of nothing. And they're basically stated that they would only provide us with a 9.5-minute response time, and they're only capable of providing BCLS, basic life support capability, for the 53% of the calls that we have, which are all EMS related, versus a premium 24 by 7 by 365 EMS service, focusing on EMS calls, providing quicker response times, providing advanced cardiac life support care, helping to speed up ambulance departures and arrivals at the hospital to save lives, and then would also provide a 365 day a year volunteer fire department service that's jack of all trades, that strives for the 9.5-minute response time and has the ability to respond to any of the calls they desire. So I think it's pretty clear. I mean, if we have the funding to do it, which would the constituents of McLendon-Chisholm like to have? I know we had a survey that asked about having paid versus volunteer service, but I think that most of the people in the McLendon-Chisholm would most definitely be interested in having a full-time EMS capability and a part-time fire capability. So moving on. In answer to the question at the top of the chart, the emergency services call numbers clearly show that we do not need a paid or manned fire service. We have the funding available to take our city emergency services from an enhanced manning at the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department to 24/7 by 365 day a year full paramedic services to address the 53% of the city's emergency service calls. And we have the funding to provide a 24 365-day a year McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department Volunteer Fire Service to address the 29% of fire calls. The choice is between enhanced manning at 12 hours a day or 24-hour paramedic service and 24-hour volunteer fire service, realizing that our fire service is 100% volunteer 12 hours a day. To address any objections that an all-volunteer fire service will leave the city vulnerable because there are likely to be very few volunteers that remain in district during the day, Councilmember Turnbull pulled the following quote that speaks to this issue. While the dependence on volunteer support can leave the city short-staffed, sometimes during weekdays, our automatic and mutual aid agreements provide for more efficient emergency response forces. That's coming out of the Royce City 2030 plan. So there are other cities who have all volunteer forces who they have the exact same position that we have, that, hey, we'll rely on our mutual aid agreements between other cities to provide that. This is another reason why I think that we need to work on toward getting us our own full-time fire department, but that at this time, I think that this is the best solution, the best direction that we should go.
And just for clarification's sake, this is not, no decisions have been made at all. We're just going through the process of investigating what our options are. One of the issues, obviously, when it comes to fighting, let's say, a house fire, if your house catches on, if someone's a citizen's house catches on fire, the fire department, the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department, which is manned by 2 men, would arrive, but they could not go into that structure. They could hook up the hoses. They could put a hose in a window. They could spray from the top of the house, but they cannot arrive. They cannot start actually going into the fire, into the structure until mutual aid arrives, until Rockwall, Royce City, and other fire departments arrive on the scene, because there is a OSHA standard, I think it's OSHA standard of two men in and 2 men out. So there has to be this, for safety reasons. The issue, I think, for a lot of people is, well, if you just go all volunteer, well then we have a fire, well then my house will burn down. The fact of the matter is, you are already dependent. We are already dependent on mutual aid. Period. No matter what the situation. Today we are dependent upon that. The question for me is, how can we best serve our community? And where we have one house fire inside the city of McLendon-Chisholm in 2017. But most all of our calls which are true emergency calls, are emergency EMS related. This option is one very good option that we should take seriously, especially because the fire chief in the Dallas Morning News said that it would take $92,000. This is what he said in the Dallas Morning News. $92,000 to run a all-volunteer fire department for a year. Well, what we're offering in our contract was $33,000 a year. Match that with the county's contribution of $67,500 a year. That's $101,000, which is more than enough to sustain an all-volunteer fire department. So that's why, where we can put a highly effective EMS vehicle at the ready and serve our citizens and possibly save a lot of lives, this is something that I hope that, Adrian, we're going to be moving on to your stuff in a minute. I hope that your committee will take seriously. So, any other discussion? Councilman Herron, thank you for putting all of this together. Seriously.
No, Councilmember Turnbull's have been helping with this as well, so.
Thank you, Councilman, both of you. I really appreciate you guys going through that. And as we said, this This presentation in PowerPoint form is available on the city website. Is it up right now?
No, I can't do that right now.
No, I was just asking. Okay, so it'll be up tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I'm in the meeting here, so.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Okay, so that'll be up, so that way you don't have to file an open records request. We want to do everything openly and transparently, so thank you guys very much for this information. You know, there's at the last city council meeting, right before we had, Dave Butler came into my office and said there's a Channel 8 news crew or camera outside. I said, well, okay, so, you know, why are they here? What are they doing? And we didn't have any idea. We didn't call them, but of course, we know that in mailboxes all over the city, someone had put information about the city council meeting, urging people to come to the city council meeting and let their voice be heard. And so it all made sense that that they've been called, the press had been called about that. Come to find out, the reporter that was assigned the story basically heard the citizen comments and then heard our comments and heard the reasoning why we've moved toward the direction that we're in, and basically didn't see much of a story there and handed it off to Tanya Iser, another Channel 8 reporter, who's an investigative reporter. And so on Monday, Martin Luther King Day, she asked if I could do an interview with her, and so I did, and we did the interview here in my office here at City Hall, and that's where she basically dropped a bombshell and said, did you realize that the fire chief is going to be urging the members of the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department to stop service to the city. Now that was a bombshell because the week before in the city council meeting, Councilmember Orchard had surprised all of us. I was not prepared for his motion, but again, it doesn't bother me that he did, but he basically wanted to try again to negotiate with the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department. He proposed to get as he called it, the two bulls out of the arena, me and the fire chief, which I had already stepped away from negotiations. If I was the lightning rod, I wanted to get out of there and allow Councilmember Turnbull and Orchard to do negotiations. That went nowhere, and so this was Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Orchard's idea, and the idea was to lower the discord and to kind of let cooler heads prevail. From what I had understood, the Thursday I got word that they were willing to meet with us, so I was glad for that, and it was the understanding would be that the council voted, and we all agreed that we would give Councilmember Turnbull and Mayor Pro Tem Orchard absolute ability to negotiate on our behalf. That whatever they negotiated, we would support and we would back. They didn't have to come back to us. Our understanding was that the negotiation would happen with 2 members of our council and 2 members of the McLendon-Chisholm Volunteer Fire Department. It wasn't until, I guess, late in last week that I learned that they didn't want to give 2 members of the fire department that much authority, and they
Mr.
did.
Mayor,
Excuse me?
May I interrupt you, please?
Please.
The discussion or the road that you're going down, I think will hinder Mr. Orchard and Mike's ability to...
I'm not actually going to make a commentary. I'm just making a statement of fact that the representatives that they have chosen are going to have to caucus with the fire department. I'm just making a statement of fact, and I'm not making commentary.
I would appreciate if you would refrain so that there is no impingement upon Mr. Orchard and myself due to any comments made here tonight and our ability to negotiate. But
I understand.
you
I
have
agree.
the right to say what you want.
I
but
agree with you. And all I'm saying is, our understanding, the council needs to be aware, because we all voted, that this was going to be the understanding, that they were going to have 2 representatives, we were going to have 2 representatives, both representatives had full authority to speak and act on behalf of both organizations. That is not the case for them. I just want the council to be aware that that they are going to meet in the conference room, then they're going to caucus with the members of the fire department. So it's going to be a back and forth, and I want to make sure that the council is okay with Councilmember Turnbull and and Mayor Pro Tem Orchard continuing to have the authority to speak on our behalf, that will back up whatever they negotiate, or is there any objection to that before we allow them to move forward? Is there any objection? Okay, I wanted to make sure that everyone is clear, and this council is okay with that change in what we had understood. Is that okay? All right, very good.
Well, I just wanted to say is like that, I'd rather have Orchard here if we were ever to have that discussion. So
What's that?
whatever we were talking about, I don't feel comfortable without him here to talk about that kind of stuff.
Talk about what?
Talk about whatever this was.
The negotiation of the
Yeah.
negotiation? Yeah, well, that's my understanding of what's happened. Is that accurate?
what I can tell you is that Mr. Orchard and I are in agreement that the arrangements made for the negotiations meet our requirements, and we're comfortable with negotiating with the terms as they've been agreed to. So, and Mr. Orchard has led that discussion. I was out of town most of last week, so he's actually been feeding me the information and we've discussed it. But I think he would agree with what I've said tonight, that we need not, what's the word I want, inflame with rhetoric anything. We're comfortable going ahead unless you guys have, for some reason, lost trust in our negotiation abilities.
All right, I just want to make sure that, like I said, I didn't want to have that discussion without Orchard here. So, okay,
Well, the negotiations start Thursday, just
I
be aware.
understand, yeah.
Is that right? Thursday morning?
1 o'clock Thursday afternoon.
Thursday afternoon, thank you very much. Okay.
I have confidence in Mayor Pro Tem Orchard and Councilmember Turnbull. I don't have any qualms about it. I mean, I don't see how that's any different, how they negotiate on their side versus how we negotiate.
Very good.
I'm just glad that we're negotiating.
I agree completely. All right. All right, so what I'd like to do is move us forward because, and to make some things official. So I've added to the agenda a discussion and action to establish an ad hoc temporary citizens committee for future emergency services for the city, including establishing purpose and goals for such a committee. So first, I'd like to have a motion to establish an ad hoc committee for that purpose. That's not been done yet. We went through the minutes just to make sure. So this is, while we've all kind of said this is what we want, we haven't actually pulled the trigger.
Point of information.
Yes, sir.
How is this different than the feasibility study, or
That's what this is.
Or is this
That's
a
what
new
this
name?
is. Well, the feasibility study is a committee.
It
You wanna speak to it?
It wasn't made official when we talked about it, when I did the presentation, and even after that.
Okay.
And we
I
did
just-
check the minutes just to make sure.
I just was
yeah.
wanting to make sure that we weren't doing two things the same. But
Right,
if we're talking about the same subject, that's fine.
So it's an ad hoc committee, which means it's temporary. So is there a motion to approve, to move forward with an ad hoc temporary citizens committee?
So moved.
Mr. Turnbull makes the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Mr. Herron seconds it. Mr. Turnbull, you have the floor to speak to your motion.
I will defer to Councilmember Balcom.
Mr. Herron, you have the floor to speak to your second.
No, I just believe that what Councilperson Balcom has provided before in her presentation, that there is definitely room for us to provide much better services. We just need to get the right people in to get moving on this. And so I applaud Ms. Balcom for taking the lead on this and moving out on it.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, motion carries by unanimous consent without objection. Now we move to item 1 where I entertain a motion to appoint Councilmember Balcom as the chairperson of this ad hoc Emergency Services Citizens Committee.
So moved.
Mr. Turnbull is moved for the motion. Is there a second? Second. Mr. Woodham is motion has seconded. Is there any discussion on either of you who made the motion or seconded? Any other discussion? Hearing none, the motion carries by unanimous consent without objection. Item number 2 on this is discussion action authorizing the city secretary to provide Chairperson Balcom with a list of citizens and contact information who have expressed an interest in volunteering to serve on the committee via the separate email opt-in page that follows the citizen survey. This will not interfere with the citizen survey, but I did want to provide the council with full disclosure and make it an official action that the city secretary has the right to go in and start pulling that information, which is an email opt-in. It is separate from the city survey, but it gives Mrs. Balcom the opportunity to have a list of people who have said, yes, I'd like to be a part of that committee. And Lisa can continue to update Mrs. Balcom with additions as time goes on. Is there a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve that.
Mr. Herron makes a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Turnbull seconds. Any discussion?
Just to note that Orchard Mayor Pro Tem Orchard mentioned this a couple of meetings ago, that he would like to see it get started quickly. So, and that when people started saying that they wanted to join in the committee, that so it's a good thing. So even though he's not here, I remember him saying that he's approving that.
Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none, the motion passes by unanimous consent without objection. And now, discussion, I'll entertain a motion to authorize Chairperson Balcom to assemble a list of nominees for appointment to the committee for consideration and vote of the City Council. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Turnbull's motion, is there a second?
I'll second it, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Herron is seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, motion carries by unanimous consent without objection. Item number 4 is discussion action authorizing $5,000 in funding to the committee to fulfill its purpose. Is there a motion for this?
So moved.
Mr. Turnbull's made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Woodham is seconded. Mr. Turnbull, you have the floor to speak to your motion.
I don't believe $5,000 is an unreasonable amount to budget for this. Yes, it is not part of our current budget, but I believe we can take it out of Butler's going away party. No, I believe we can find the money to fund this if you have to spend that much.
Okay, good. Yeah, because I just want to make sure, there has been people who have offered to do it for free, but I don't want to offer that. I think it's going to be a lot of work, and this will be an award for them. But I just want to make sure that it's also said that if something should happen, I want to negotiate. I'm not going to say we're going to automatically spend $5,000 right off the bat. I will be very conservative.
Who made the second? Was it Mr. Woodham? Do you have the floor to speak to your second?
Just that we use it wisely, and due to the current state of where we find ourselves, I think it will be used wisely.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, I will take a vote on this. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, motion carries unanimously. Moving on to the citizen yep, sir? Okay, yeah, that's fine. We will adjourn for a break. The time is 8:27 PM. We'll reconvene in about 10, 15 minutes.
Hi. No. Elaine? Oh, nice to meet you in person. Oh, good. I'm glad you came. You look totally different than what I expected. I thought you were like this blonde lady and like you had no, I don't, but anyway, no, I didn't do a background check on you or anything. Well, anyway, so how do you think things are going?
Brian, do you have a score? Okay. Yeah. You can break decorum if you find out, just so you know. All right. Are we ready? Are we rolling? Okay. All right, let's, the time is 8:49. I call this meeting back to order. We'll move on to item number 9, the citizen survey, just to make sure that citizens are aware. Oh, by the way, it's 26:41 LSU at halftime. Oh, goodness. Mr. Turnbull? The citizen survey is out, and there will be a reminder, should hit mailboxes on Friday for those who have not taken it. If those who have taken it, would not receive one unless they took it after the mailing drops. So there will be a couple of reminders. The end of the survey date end, I believe, is February 14th. The reason why it was extended is because last year we looked at the date, and when last year, when we had originally put together all the mailers and things like that, we had expected to send them out in mid-December. We didn't get it out until January, so we're trying to make sure that people have plenty of time to answer the survey. So, yes, sir, Mr. Turnbull.
You said January 14th?
February
14th?
February 14th, yes, sir. Oh, February 12th. Sorry. Thank you. It's February 12th. I stand corrected. I didn't look at the. Thank you again to the Assistant City Administrator. Thank you. All right. So, council member reports and announcements. Mayor Pro Tem is out of town on business. Mr. Turnbull, do you have anything to report on budget, finance, and investment?
I do not, but the city secretary does.
Or the Assistant City Administrator?
Her third hat, Chief Investment Officer.
You should have a link to the quarterly investment report, our first quarterly investment report. So I tried to follow the guidelines that we set up as far as what we were going to be reporting every quarter. So the significant things this time are that we took money from some of our alliance accounts, our money market, and our utility fund. And we have kind of sister accounts now over at Logic, but those Logic accounts are the investment pools. And they are currently making 1.5%, which doesn't sound like much, but it's a heck of a lot better than the 0.2 or whatever it was we were getting before. So these got established probably mid-December. So I think the next quarterly report, you'll see a significant difference in the interest income. I opened up a third one. If you're looking at the report, the INS account 3 there, that was opened up just after this quarter ended, but that's in place now as well. And I moved our INS money, the ad valorem taxes that are going to go to pay down our debt. I'm moving that into the investment pool too, so it's not just sitting there, it's actually gaining some interest in between making payments for that debt. So, and I'm trying to answer any questions. We do have one kind of leftover, I haven't touched it, it's the tax pool investment pool. We had a small amount of money, $18,000, and I've just left it there because I wanted to leave the account open. The interest is not bad, but it's just not quite the same as what Logic is. So I've got the bulk of our money in Logic and a little bit in tax pool just to keep that account open. I also included, just for your reading pleasure, a little bit of information. It's just the newsletters from those investment pools that are kind of behind the report, just in case you wanted to know kind of portfolio information or the reason or why or how they invest those funds. And so there's one for each of, one for tax pool and one for Logic. So with that, I'll try to answer any questions if you have any.